The U.S. Department of Defense used to be one of the biggest funders of innovation. The U.S. government has been the greatest de-risker of technology. Pixar's first customer was the CIA. The government is one of the few places that's going to spend a lot of money exponentially. Whenever there's an opportunity like that, where the government is going to shift the economics of building a new space, and historical participants no longer want to participate, that's an opportunity for alpha.
Defense tech-focused funds may be out of business in 5-10 years.
We're coming up on our 4th unicorn out of 38 investments.
Today's guest is Alex Harstrick, co-founder of J2 Ventures, a new but fast-growing venture firm laser-focused on dual-use defense technology. Alex explains why every tech founder should pay attention to the DoD as a customer whose budget is $1 trillion a year.
Never, ever build anything just for the Department of Defense. Never. If they want you to, then don't do it.
Well, hi, Alex. Welcome to the podcast. I'm excited to have you on this show today for many reasons, and one of them being that you are my go-to person on all questions dual use and defense tech. So welcome. Excited to have you.
Thanks so much, Neil and John. I really appreciate it. This is awesome.
Awesome. So as we roll into the conversation, I would like our viewers to really hear about your very exceptional backgrounds. You were a consultant, a financial analyst, then you enlisted for Army Reserve duty, then you took a year off to actually serve for the Army in defense intelligence, then you became a venture capitalist, and you became an investor, and then a venture capitalist, started your own firms. That's a very compelling background. Just introduce yourself in a little bit more detail and double click on each of those.
Thank you so much for having me on the show. I've had a really fun career so far. I've been very lucky. I think it's been largely motivated by a passion for duty and the things that I feel like I should do. And so I would say the exception to that is ironically where we got started, which was being a consultant, which I had no duty to do and I really did not enjoy. But so by quick background, I'm from California originally. So in case you hear any elongated vowels, I blame that aspect of my background. I went to undergrad at Columbia. And then I think like all good Ivy League school kids, I felt I should find a job where my job was to tell other people what to do, because it would, of course, be far beneath me to, do a real job. And so I became a consultant. I worked at a place called Booz & Company. I think it was a very important experience because it wasn't a good experience. I felt that the organization was largely pretty badly run and the partners kind of dropped the ball, and they made the decision to sell the firm for, I don't think, a huge outcome for everybody, but certainly a good outcome for them. And in the course of that, it was just kind of pandemonium where people were trying to get business wherever they could get business, and they weren't really doing what they had sold us on and what consulting was. So regardless of any further observations on my experience at Booz, I think it's important for somebody to have the illusions of corporate America broken early in their career. And in that regard, I got the job that I was supposed to get at the place I was supposed to get it, and it was awful and it was badly run. And so I think there's something kind of beautiful about that, right? You're 21, you're in a place, and you learn very early on that there is no aspirational end so long as all you are doing is staying on the corporate machine. And so I left that. I went to go work at Blue Cross Blue Shield of New Jersey, called Horizon Blue Cross Blue Shield. That was a better experience, but still not a great one at the beginning. I was in the corporate strategy function. Turns out the only thing worse than being a consultant is being corporate strategy. And at one of these, kind of massive sort of faceless corporations. And Blue Cross as a standalone organization is a great place. But I think the function I was in was, again, something where a lot of what we were doing was trying to validate our own existence through pedantic studies. And the nice thing was after that, they were trying to start a investment practice. And while I had no experience in investing, nobody was interested in doing that. And so it cleared the way for me to get my career started in here. And so that went exceptionally well. It validated the one thing I was worried about, which is, am I good at investing? Which our returns kind of spoke for themselves. But there was not a clear glide path to where you kind of go from there. You're just sort of stuck in corporate investing land. And so I'd always wanted to serve in the military. I felt like that was the best time that I could have to execute on that. I enlisted. It's actually about a year. You go into basic training, officer candidate school, that's a year. Then intelligence school, that's another 4 or 5 months. And then some follow-on schools in addition to that. So the training in and of itself was about 2 years. Then I assessed to special operations and then spent a little over a year in Afghanistan and Iraq on a counter-ISIS mission set. And then when the Pentagon found out I had this rare and mysterious skill set, to evaluate early stage technology companies. I was recruited by them to do strategic acquisitions there. Did that while I was going to business school, worked at KKR in the course of business school. And then I was fortunate that people identified a unique thesis that we had on the market and allowed us to launch J2. And so now we're about $600 million of AUM into this journey. We're coming up on our fourth unicorn out of 38 investments, and it's been great. Sorry, that was a little long.
Fantastic. Well, you've done more in 10 years or I don't know, 15 years since graduating than most people do. And what a story. So, illusion broken early on in corporate America. Very important for young, grads listening to this, that if you're in a dead and boring job, it's actually serving a purpose. It's telling you what you don't like. From there, sort of wanting to serve the country, then finding your way into an opportunity that you actually enjoy, which is investing, and now really doing something, it sounds like that you're passionate about. I want to just, before we double clicking into J2 and your focus, tell me a little bit more about if someone listening to this really did not think about serving the country early on when they were 18 years old and they're now in their 20s and they want to actually be in the Army Reserve, follow your path. Are there any specific recommendations you have for them? What does it entail? How should they go about it? And what does it actually involve? I think you touched on it a little bit, but just tell us a bit more.
Yeah, I love that question. Thank you for asking it, Nilanjana, just because I think right now there's this excitement around dual use investing. And many people are saying that that's motivated by service to the country. What I find odd about that is that at no point in that compulsion for service do people think they should actually serve. It's more profiting from the byproduct of investing in these companies, which are often service oriented. And so the biggest reason I didn't join the Army fresh out of high school or go to West Point was I was afraid of the commitment, right? I think the common refrain is that what happens if you have to go to war, not realizing that for most people in the military, they should be so lucky. Going to war is like, playing in the football game, and everything else is like being on the practice squad. Everybody wants to go and they want to be a part of the thing and be in some significant part of US history. So ironically, that went from being a risk of what happens if you go to war to what happens if you do your whole career and you never go to war. The other part is that the time commitment of being a reservist would be something pretty substantial. It is, but it's not insurmountable. And I think if you're disciplined, if you know what to do, there are plenty of extremely high performing people that are reservists, including members of Congress, people in the C-suite of companies, just all over the place. And the military about accommodating different things that people are doing. So I think it's just a misunderstood part of your career being in the reserves. And it's actually much more manageable than people let on. I wish I'd done it earlier. That being said, Nilanjana, I'm no longer a reservist. 3 funds back to back. I think I've more than fulfilled my military obligation. So I was ready to be done with it.
Okay, great. So there is still time for those that want to serve, and there are pathways to enlist as a reservist and really serve your country. So that's awesome. Now, sort of, let's fast forward to J2. Tell us more about the founding of it. What led to the founding and the focus that you have. And does your background and your stint in Afghanistan and Iraq, and then your inside view as a reservist, did that have any influence in choosing the focus of the firm?
It has to, right? I think the beauty of early stage investing, and I know you know this, is it's such an intimate method of generating alpha. And I use the word intimate very deliberately because it's a founder that's putting their life on hold to build something kind of insane. And they want to work with somebody, especially at the stage where investors like you and I participate, the earliest stages, who is equally dedicated to helping them achieve that vision, even though we are incapable of doing the technical parts that achieve that vision, right? I always find it funny whenever investors have these thoughts about what the management of the company should be like, when the reality is, if they knew the best idea, then they would own 100% of it, found the company themselves, and put the entirety of the fund there. But they don't, right? That's why we have these basket of ideas. And so what we noticed when I was working at the Defense Innovation Unit and its analog in a function called AFWERX, was my job was to find companies that would normally never sell to the US government, but they were best in class commercial companies, and get them to sell to the government. So I was walking around, going to venture capitalists, going to these companies and trying to disabuse them of the notion that they had that the government was slow and bureaucratic and a bad customer. that was really, really hard. I mean, you go all around Silicon Valley, and I seem to be this punching bag for venture capitalists that said, I would love to meet with you so I can spend an hour telling you about why everything you're doing is stupid. And let me go over the boulevard of broken dreams of companies that I've had that have tried to sell to the government. Somehow me representing the government screwed it up. Here's why it's never going to work. I'm not sure that their perspective was invalid based on their experience, but it was certainly not accurate based on the shift changes that were happening. And so whenever there's an opportunity like that, right, where the government is going to shift the economics of building a new space and the historical participants no longer want to participate, that's an opportunity for alpha. If you are seeing that there is going to be a massive influx of capital and other people do not want to do it, it felt wrong to not take advantage of that. That being said, you can't raise a fund or you can't invest in companies if you don't have money. And so I was very lucky that that coincided with the experience at KKR, which gave us some bona fides to say these are investors that are capable of going somewhere very good. You should let them start their own fund because the alternative is to work at a bulge bracket great fund.
Excellent. Okay, so you're actually, let me just summarize. So there was something shifting in the DoD world that you saw as an opportunity. This is very important because selling to DoD is nothing new, right? People have tried to sell
Mm.
it historically. It's been, as you said, as some of those Silicon Valley VCs were telling you, painful, long, complicated, and with sort of varying results, right? So there always used to be the federal sales guy that people would hire to go sell to DoD, right? And then some had success and most did not. So you're saying something changed in the past 10 years. When did it change and why? Well, what is this change? And you mentioned the Defense Innovation Unit. There's a whole bunch of acronyms here that I would love your help to demystify, and DIU is one of them.
There
So
are
so what
so
changed,
many.
when, and why? Walk us through that.
Well, so it was what was interesting, Ilanjana, is you'd spend time in Afghanistan, right? And Afghanistan and Iraq and all of these wars in the Middle East were defined by the fact that they're unfair, right? There were a lot of people, we lost amazing men and women in uniform in fighting these wars, but nothing compared to what we used to have when we had near peer conflicts. And that was because, largely speaking, we had massive overmatch over our enemy. If you are sleeping at a base in Afghanistan, the likelihood that someone is going to have a human assault on you is very, very low. And so we largely chose when we wanted to go to war. That's not the case when you're fighting or excuse me, when we wanted to go to battle, rather. That's not the case when you're fighting a near peer, right? A near peer would be Russia, China. And for a long time, we thought that these were not a threat to us. Now, that changed around 2014 when the Secretary of Defense, Chuck Hagel, introduced something called the third offset strategy, which was saying that eventually Russia and China were going to want to compete for global hegemony against the United States. And they were going to compete in a bunch of areas that we were weak: artificial intelligence, space launch, autonomy, telecommunications. And so America needed to get its act together to compete here. That was coinciding with the fact that the US Department of Defense used to be one of the biggest funders of innovation. And now it on a dollars basis doesn't compete with the likes of Apple, Amazon, Microsoft, things like that. So you have this enemy that wants to compete with you, but where the response to that enemy is coming from is no longer up to you. It's going to be from private enterprise. So we need to work with private enterprise. The problem was that very few people are going to be reading Politico or The Economist or wherever it is that you're going to like really dive into the depths of the third offset strategy. And so we had a marketing issue, right? It was the military that wanted this to happen. And there is a solid distrust of government in Silicon. There was a solid distrust of government in Silicon Valley. So they needed people like me that were going to go and speak venture capitalists and speak business to get this going, because just coming and saying you have an obligation or a service or et cetera to sell your company to the US government was not going to work. And so the military started a bunch of different organizations. One of the most prolific was the Defense Innovation Unit, but over the course of 2 to 3 years, they had about 80 different innovation units. AFWERX, NavalX. I There is a whole list of these, Neil and Jana, that we can share. Most of them were pretty bad and were pretty frivolous. And some would even argue the first generation of the Defense Innovation Unit was was not effective. And so it really took a concerted effort of a bunch of people that wanted to make this work to get it off the ground. But now you're catching what a process that has been 10 years in the making, where defense tech is hot. The government is one of the few places that's going to spend a lot of money exponentially as an enterprise customer. And we are investing a lot more in our defense infrastructure and dual use infrastructure than we ever have.
Okay, so that's the opportunity. So let me just summarize for our listeners what you just said. So about 2014, the sort of strategy of the DoD shifted to really invest much more heavily in upgrading our defense tech, if you will, to really fight the near-peer threat. So that led to a whole plethora of initiatives, 80 plus organizations or departments set up, of which some have really now honed into real machinery that can help bring in commercial technology to modernize the U.S. Army, Navy, Air Force, what have you. Is that right? And so what are these couple of organizations or subunits, whatever you want to call them? What is the terminology? Which are these departments, sub-departments? Please tell us more so that people listening to this can understand, okay, I need to work with these 4 agencies to get my commercial technology into the DoD.
It's hard to summarize that there are just 4, right, Neil and John? I mean,
Okay.
really, like, what I would say is let's start with the ones that are the most famous that people will definitely know. And so I would say that would be the Defense Innovation Unit, AFWERX, NavalX, the Marine Innovation Unit, SpaceWorks, kind of encapsulating each branch of their most prolific element. Now, there are a bunch of others. How effective those are is still a source of debate, Neil and John. I mean, you go on any of these signal chats among defense gurus, and everyone is saying, oh, isn't this person so full of it? And isn't this organization so ineffective? And of course. So it's still up for debate. I would argue they're all effective in their own way. And regardless of how you feel about each individual organization, the culture of the Pentagon is one such that you are rewarded for working with early stage startups. So who takes credit for that? I don't know. But I could say, even if you don't work specifically with these organizations, their large pools of money are dependent on working with the broader national security infrastructure. So let's use the Defense Innovation Unit, for example. DIU, in and of itself, actually doesn't have a ton of money relative to the overall defense budget. What they would prefer to do is they would prefer to have the Navy, big Navy, let's call it Indo-PACOM, somebody like that, come and say, I have this problem. I have a carrier group. People get sick on the carrier group. I don't know when they're sick. They get everybody else sick. And as a result, I have to take out an aircraft carrier because everybody was sick. By the way, this happened during COVID. It's the only time in US history that we lost an aircraft carrier was during COVID because everybody got COVID. The Navy would say, help me with a population health wearable that will tell me when people are getting sick so I can cordon them off so I no longer lose the entire carrier group or the aircraft carrier in this case. That would spur on an initiative. And then the Defense Innovation Unit would say, great, I found all of these companies. Can you help me figure out which one that you like the most? And then the commander would say, I want that one. And great, now you're on contract for Indo-PACOM via the Defense Innovation Unit. But the most important thing was the guy or gal with all of the money knew where they could go to channel that money towards startups, knowing that they're not startup people, knowing they're not venture capitalists. And the Pentagon wants that to happen now more than ever.
Okay, excellent. So that's the opportunity. So for sort of the average company that may not know the ins and outs of the labyrinth of how to funnel the money and where to get the order, they could start at one of these agencies like the Defense Innovation Unit. Those people know where to go get the budget from. That's what you're saying, right? And to your point. Okay, excellent.
Yeah,
So
you want to get on their radar, right? Like that.
you want to
That's
get
you
on their
want
radar,
to.
right?
So that way, once an initiative comes, they know that they can call you to have you put in a
Got it.
proposal for it. Yeah.
Right. Okay, so you're focused on, so let's go back to your focus, J2 Ventures
Yeah.
focus, and you call it dual use. Just help us understand, what does that mean?
Yeah, dual use is an interesting one. Dual use refers to any product that can sell to both the military and commercial enterprise. Um, I think people over-index on the military aspect of that, Neil and Jana. And back to my previous example, the company I was referring to that went through this process was my company, Aura Ring. Aura is, I think, the most famous wearable on Earth right now, right? Maybe an Apple Watch. but they're one is a startup and one is a $1 trillion company. So I think Aura has a lot to be proud of. But Aura is on contract with the Department of War right now. Massive contracts with the Department of
Yeah,
War.
so let me pause you there. So, I mean, Aura is fantastic. J2 invested, but I'm just going by the age of the company. This must have been a Series D or something investment by the time you went in, right? I mean, it had raised capital. It was already a commercial product, probably had 10, 20, 30 million of revenue by the time you invested. So at that time, nobody thought of Aura as a defense tech or dual use company. I still don't think of Aura as a dual use company, right? So you're saying it is some product that has the potential to unlock a 10 million spend, 20 million, 30 million? Like, what qualifies it as sort of really calling it dual use versus they happen to have the DoD as one of their 200 customers
Yeah, and
or
the
1,000
threshold
customers for?
or
Yeah,
1,000. Yeah.
yeah,
The threshold is something that I think everyone can debate.
right.
So when we originally got involved with Aura was after their Series B. I was actually an advisor to the company on defense sales. At that point, they did not know how to spell DoD, right? And the CEO at the time, Harpreet Rai, was a wonderful guy. Harpreet had some experience with the department previously. And Harpreet said, look, I have two areas that this company is going to grow: healthcare and defense. Those are the two sales mechanisms. I got to figure out how to do it. Harpreet was just a very, very forward-leaning leader of Aura. He was great to work with. So we had a pretty free reign to get it done. I will say, first and foremost, there is no threshold by which you are defined as a dual-use company. It doesn't matter if you get $1 of sales or 100 million in sales. The answer
It's so
in our
it
mind,
sounds sorry. So it's a
yeah,
way that you categorize the company. So you're looking at it as, okay, does this company have high potential inside the DoD? Would that be
yeah,
fair? Yeah.
I think
Okay.
that's right. Look at it as a barbell, I would say, Neil and
Mhm.
Jana, is that there are two effective ways by which you sell to the government. And as seed investors and seed companies who we're talking to, right? Your company is just getting started and you're like, hey, I have this really cool technical product. I have patents. I have this moat. It's going to be really great. I've never thought about selling to the government. Here's why you should. And if I don't convince you, that's fine. You don't have to sell to the government. I think you should. The the US government has been the greatest de-risker of technology since we cared about investing in technology through venture capital. It's not an accident that VC funding really took off in the 50s, right around when we were competing with the Soviet Union in the space race, right?
Yes, Hewlett Packard was arguably the first defense tech company, right? Before they
That's
had other customers, the DoD was its first major customer.
it's Cisco
Absolutely.
Systems.
A long
Same thing.
history. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
Pixar's first
Absolutely.
customer was the
Right.
CIA. Oracle spun out of the CIA program. I would argue, every single deep tech company that we have outside of social media, and even then, you could argue some of the connectivity and infrastructure came from that, was funded by the Department of Defense or created with the Department of Defense as a customer in mind. So think about it like a barbell if I was a company. So early stage companies should be seeing the DoD as a de-risker. They de-risk short-term product market fit. You're Cisco Systems, you're a bunch of postdocs at Stanford, you're trying to make this connectivity infrastructure. NSF is going to give you money to build it. $4 million before Sequoia even knows that this thing exists.
This is the non-dilutive financing that many companies are using, and that's how they're kind of accidentally turning into a dual use or a defense tech company because of the funding,
Yeah.
right?
Right. But I don't see, and it's funny because that word accidental is really funny, as I would say it's only accidental because we don't realize the matrix that we're in. The reason America has risk capital is because the American government allows risk capital to exist. And so all of these are related aspects of that exact same impetus.
Hmm.
Right. The Department of Defense creates SBICs because they want people to invest in certain areas, or rather, the SBA creates SBICs, small
Hmm.
business innovation
Right.
corporations, these kind of things, or investment corporations. That is because the government has really, since the government has had centralized infrastructure by which to do this, had a mechanism where they tell individual states, individual investors, individual people, if you do this, I will give you a financial incentive to do that, whether it be in the form of tax breaks, economic incentives, all of these kind of pieces. So if we disabuse ourselves of the Department of War, which is a relatively new branding, as a war machine, and instead think about it as a cost indiscriminate mechanism by which the federal government can touch individual states, which normally the federal government doesn't really do in a big way, and tell them where to invest certain things. It's just the long arm of the federal government. That is a much better way to think about it. And outside of that, its needs are the same as any other corporation. In fact, their needs are greater than any other corporation. And so the early part is, hey, I want you guys to build this stuff. I'm going to give you money to do it. I'm going to spend $200 billion to say, make really cool stuff in America. And then the later stage is going to be, okay, we've made something really cool. I have an Anduril. I have one of our companies, Illyria. We have one of these really, really, really big things that's clearly working. We're going to back in a lot of money. You can have a dedicated defense practice to do that. But in the early stage, it doesn't matter what you're building. You could be Cisco Systems or Pixar. You're going to make Toy Story 3. Awesome. Here's money from the government. And I think it would be ridiculous not to pick up those dollars.
Absolutely. Okay, so excellent framing. Barbell strategy of looking at the world. Early stage companies that can use these budgets to get product market fit. And then you may have built a product maybe for the commercial market, but the DoD could suddenly turn into a major customer, such as Aura. So it sounds like you were a really value-add investor to Aura because you helped them hopefully expand into that market. And Harpreet was a forward-looking CEO who said, that's the market I want to go after. And they landed major contracts, it sounds like, with the DoD. So that would be the other end of the barbell, as you said. So very, very helpful framing. Let me then just double-click a little bit more on that. Let's talk about the other end of the barbell, or maybe companies that are in the middle trying to get to the large DoD budget. So let's say a company has started in the commercial market like Aura, right? And then now it wants to crack into a large DoD budget unlock. Do they have to think about sort of repurposing the product? So I have a product question and then a specific sort of go-to-market question, which is how long does it take to actually get that $10, $20, $30 million contract? Or has that sped up now since 2014 because of all these agencies and initiatives within the DoD? That sales cycle has sped up. So two questions. Does the product need to change? Does it have to be redone? And then how long is the sales cycle now?
So I will answer your question with an axiom that I tell every company, which is never, ever build anything just for the Department of Defense. Never. Period. If they want you to, then don't do it. Then turn it down. The DoD, or rather the aspect of the DoD that you're dealing with that you think has your best interests in mind, simply doesn't. It can't. Right? There are millions of people that work for the Department of Defense. And if you're not an expert, then you will take an individual's opinion as a representation of the overall organization. And it never is. Even if it comes from the Secretary of Defense, that person could very well not be in their job in 4 years. So why would you make an entire company over the whims of an individual, as opposed to building the thing that you think is right and hoping that the customer is going to receive it on the other side? The only effective mechanism you have to do that is on the commercial side, where feedback constantly is really important. On the defense side, it doesn't work that way. So when I'm thinking about how people sell from a product perspective, Neil and Jana, this is why I like dual use. Outside of some philosophical bents that we have towards it, it is the most effective way to consistently make a good company. But on the sort of how you scale thereafter, it's tough. But it's like any massive enterprise sale.
So you're saying the product really does not need to have anything different. So an Aura does not have to have a separate, I think behind the firewall or on-prem version for the data that is proprietary to the DoD. So no product changes required. A SaaS company could just have a commingled AWS situation and it's okay. And the DoD is fine buying that version of the product. Is that correct?
So it's to what extent we say we're making product changes. Now, where you're hosting the data could change, right? But I wouldn't argue that's much of a product change.
Right.
When I think through,
right.
It's a different
no
hosting.
Product feature change. I see. Okay.
Feature
so you
change.
may have you may have to customize where you host. You may have to segregate the data, but you don't have to really build a new version of the product. That's what you're saying.
And
It's the
you'd
same
want
product.
that, right? Say
right.
if you're an Aura Ring, we've already seen this. People have these wonderful conspiracy theories of, oh, they're working with the DoD. They're going to think like that. I was like, oh my God. I will say, I think people wish they had that, not Aura, but like others had the level of confidence to be able to mine this kind of information. Like not only does Aura have no interest in betraying investor confidence, customer confidence in that regard, but there's really no mechanism by which the DoD can come in and steal that kind of stuff. It's separately hosted, but the Ring is the same, right? So the Ring that that you're selling to a soldier is the same as what you're selling to Kim Kardashian. And
Yeah.
that is because when it comes to fitness, Kim Kardashian's actually pretty discerning. And the thing that she wants her regimen to look preternaturally young is the same thing that will the user interface that would help, SEAL Team 6 in making sure their performance is also really strong.
Right.
It's a ridiculous example, but it kind of elucidates what we're going for here, which is
It's
what
an
is,
excellent
yeah,
example, right? I think the ring for Kim and the ring for my helicopter pilot, sort of at the core of it is the same product. And, their methods to sell it and market it may be different, but the core of the product is the same. So that's actually fantastic news for a lot of founders who may not have thought of the DoD as a big customer, but should now start thinking about, okay, that could be a customer for my XYZ product. So let's then touch on the go-to-market. So do they need to go hire an ex-Army captain to be their sales guy? How do you go about, this is a whole opaque world, even with your help in trying to help us demystify this. But, me as a venture capitalist for 25 years, I'm listening to all these acronyms and sort of my head is spinning already. So if I'm a founder, I got a 50 million revenue business. I think, XYZ DoD could be a huge customer for me. How should I think of my go-to-market, my sales team?
Yeah, no, it's a great point. What I try and make clear though, Neil and Jana, before I talk about the specifics of go-to-market is anybody can sell to the DoD. And I would include, by the way, just for
How?
brevity is
Yes, of
yeah,
course
yeah.
they
So
can,
we'll
but
go into
how?
how, but
Right. Yeah.
and I would include VA, Department of Energy, all these kind of pieces, right? So how is a function of two things, and that's where you believe you want to end up on that barbell. And so if your goal is to start from this end and move all the way to this end, you need a jungle guide, right? You need someone who is going to take you through soup to nuts. It's really an expert. You need to be fully committed. That is usually a person who specializes in go-to-market. The reason I'm reticent to come and say that right away is because I think the DoD sales process is unfairly penalized. Because what other industry do you not need an expert to come sell to, right? You're going to go and knock on the door of United Health in Minnesota and say, hey, I want to sell you guys a bunch of health insurance stuff. I know nothing about health insurance, but here I am. I think you could use it, and have them say, this is not how it works. Like, you contact someone, they contact me, we go through this procurement cycle. There's really no industry outside of direct to consumer where that happens. And so I think it is an unfair penalization when you say the DoD is different than any other massive enterprise sale.
Absolutely. I think it's a very, very fair point. You're saying treat it as any other vertical. It's a vertical sale, treat it as any other vertical, get smart on it.
100%.
So keep
100%.
going. Yeah.
And so
Okay.
in that, the problem is there are so many charlatans here. By the way, funds are the same way. There used to be no funds in defense or dual use sales. Now you would be hard pressed to find a fund that doesn't have someone who thinks that they're an expert on this. They're just not. By the way, being in the Army doesn't make you an expert. When I was in the Army, you go through basic training. When God was in the Army for 5 years before I knew anything about how procurement works. The real unlock for this, Neil and Jana, was when I was in Afghanistan, and you see that there are defense contracts for everything from the M4 rifle to Taco Tuesday with KBR. That's a defense contract. Like, there is someone who has paid a lot of money from the DoD to make sure we have tacos every Tuesday. And so you're 5 years in before you even realize how arcane this infrastructure is. And even then, I don't know how a single dollar is allocated. So I think it is incredibly stupid when someone says, oh, they were in the military, they know how procurement works. No, they don't. And so there are a lot of people who will sell you based on background that they know how these things work. Even worse is when somebody has a external go-to-market whatever service where they say, I will help you get this defense contract. And you think you're at an orthodontist because all they're selling you is retainers. And they just say, if you come here, pay me $5,000 a month, I'll try and find you a customer. Well, lo and behold, a year goes by, they've made $60,000, they sold nothing for you. So I'm kind of telling you what not to do. Now, the parts that are important to do are work with someone on this end of the barbell where you found them to be very effective. There's going to be good go-to-market consultants. Those go-to-market consultants are known. They have a background and a tear sheet that will tell you this is the amount of awards that they've gotten over this time frame, and so they can more or less not guarantee, but significantly de-risk success for that non-dilutive financing. If you want to attack the other end, then you need the expertise built in-house. You can't make Anduril if you've never served in the Department of Defense, or you don't have someone there who served, who really understands acquisitions, who understands congressional processes. You need that. Just like you can't make a health insurance product if you have no one who understands health insurance.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, so let me just summarize because you're making a very, very important point. First point you made earlier in the conversation is the DoD is 1 million people. So you can't take the word of any one person and just take it to the bank and say, I'm going to build this product or I'm going to
It's
sell it
actually a
this
lot
way.
more than 1 million people. Yeah, the Army
Okay,
Reserve
more
is
is
more
it
than 1
just
million.
that's
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
So it is
Yeah.
a vast, complex, multi-dimensional organization. So just there's a high risk of false positives if you're just
Huge.
taking one or two conversations, including as you said, the defense secretary. They may be here today and they may be gone tomorrow, right? So it's a
Huge.
vast, complex organization. So be careful in what signals you're drawing from what conversations. So for the early stage companies, your counsel is go in and then find what is worth the consultants, advisors who have helped you get that SBIR funding, get that initial, set of whatever non-dilutive funding. So something's working, use that. And then if you're the Barbell company that really is serious about unlocking the 20, 30, 40, $100 million budget, you really need an insider. That's what you're saying. Either on your
You do.
board, on your sales team, in your exec team. That expertise has to be, so you need to go find the ex-Army general or the Navy general.
In your exec team, right, Neil and John, it has to be part of the DNA. Now, I would say I don't love the general thing, right? Because generals don't write their own emails at the end of their career. They're not going to know what to sell to. I mean, I was at a dinner with
So what would you, if not the general, then who's the right higher profile?
The right people that you always want to deal with. And this is why the other person I was going to pick on was the investors that say, I can definitely guarantee this for you, right? Open up these doors. Neil and John, I can get you a meeting with whoever you want. I'm sure of it at some point. It might take some work, but I can guarantee that will not end up in a contract for you, right? The people who actually write the contracts, right? You think this is almost $1 trillion budget. $1 trillion is a lot of money to spend over 365 days. That's not being done by 150 generals. Even if those generals were writing billion-dollar contracts, which they're not, that would be $150 billion that they're spending. They have to spend 6 times that. How could they possibly do that? That just doesn't make any sense. I'm obviously not properly capturing all of the generals that we have, but I'm just saying the math doesn't work. Even if you don't believe anything that I'm saying, that only general officers are writing these contracts. So the real people that write contracts are somewhere in the middle. That would be like the Army captain through, not captain, I'm saying I'm using Army ranks. They're different depending on the branch, but captain through general, where all of those people have a budget of something in the order of $20 to $2 billion that they have to spend on certain projects. That's that squishy middle.
Per
year.
So the DoD is spending, again, for those who are listening, $1 trillion per year.
Yes.
Right? $1 trillion per year.
We should bear in mind some of that is operations and maintenance. Some of that has to go
There's
towards,
there's large buckets. But even if you just take a small percentage of that per year on just software and hardware spend, that's a big vertical.
I mean, look at one of the most valuable companies on the stock market right now, Palantir.
Right.
By the way, a dual-use company. I'd say Palantir, I think it's about 60% comes from the Department of Defense, 40% comes from private industry. Regardless of what your feelings are on Palantir, that company is cooking. And I think most founders would love to end up in the same economic position as Palantir. And so steal their playbook. Alex Karp is not a defense guy. Alex Karp did not serve in the DoD, but he figured out the go-to-market by hiring the right experts, by working in the right aspects of the Pentagon, while simultaneously selling on the commercial side. So there are a bunch of companies that are just like that. But what I would say, Neil and John, the part I really wanted to pick on was these investors, this pre-Cambrian explosion of investors that seem to all be overnight experts on this is horrible. Horrible for founders, horrible for the sector, because they are going to get a lot of people beef up their infrastructure with bad information that is not in the DNA of the company. And even if you raise at some massive price, because you think that you deserve it, it's the road down when you get no contracts, no conversion, and that investor ends up getting fired because his or her boss knows they don't know what they're talking about, that you just kind of end up with this morass of nothing. That is really, really unfortunate, and people are going to blame the DoD and not the morons that got them there.
So you seem to be saying that we are in a defense tech bubble, and a lot of these so-called defense tech funds will be out of business in 5-10 years.
Yeah. No question.
No question.
So,
and we've seen this movie before, right? So probably this defense tech, I don't know what the feeling is. I don't know. Perhaps it's the success of Palantir and Ural as a new defense contractor, right? SpaceX, OpenGov. So some very successful companies has led to a Cambrian explosion of defense tech focused funds that may be out of business in 5-10 years.
Yeah,
We'll see.
and but
Time
I'm
will
not
tell.
pick time will tell. The unfortunate thing whenever you say time will tell is like over a long enough time horizon, kind of everyone's out of business, right? But it's less about that, Nilanjana, and it's more about when you think through a bubble, it is what percentage of the companies and their enterprise value is supported by historical multiples in the space. And so you've listed some of the best ones. There's such a survivorship bias, though. If somebody thinks they're going to do what Anduril does, well, then you need Peter Thiel to back the company, and you need these superstar founders to help you build that company that are going to be irrationally focused on getting it done. Palmer Luckey sold a company for over $1 billion before he founded this company. The guy knows how to scale a company, right? And then they bring on amazing people in the background. The Christian Bros, who I believe now is CEO, worked for John McCain before that and did a ton of defense appropriations. The guy literally wrote the book on what would motivate a lot of people to come into the space. Thinking that you can just come and do Anduril without having all of those personalities replaced is insane.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm far from an expert in the space, but just reading the sort of headlines, what you're saying has makes a lot of sense to me. So I would then imagine that you're not a big believer in single-use defense investing.
I'm not. And for
A
two
lot of
reasons.
funds are popping up to do autonomous warfare, what have you, or navigation. I mean, Boston has become a hub for a lot of sort of naval tech, right? So, but these are all single-use investments, single-use companies. Um, what is I know you have your reasons to be skeptical, but what's the bull case for these companies?
The bull case is, and I believe this, that legacy contractors have dropped the ball. L3Harris, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman. I'm not picking on them as massive institutions. I think they have a really, really good place, actually. They're super helpful in ushering these companies through the process. But if you go to Anduril, Nilanjana, and you go to Northrop Grumman headquarters, it is a different world. Going to Anduril is a tech company. It is exciting. Everyone is working super hard. It's really cool. Going to Northrop Grumman feels like you're going to the polar opposite of that, right? By comparison, it's a retirement community. And I'm not picking on Northrop Grumman, although it sounds like I am. But my point is, if we believe that the future of warfare is going to be in this more software defined or space or telecom kind of ecosystem, then you need the kind of people that are working at the forefront of that. And those kinds of people want to work at Google. They don't want to work at, whatever, insert stodgy company here. And so that cultural shift that you have at Anduril will allow them to, allows them to bring on better talent, which means they have a better feedback loop of building better technology at the end of it.
Right.
And
okay.
yeah.
Yeah, keep going. So
So,
you're
yeah.
saying sort of the bull cases, the legacy defense contractors, it's time for them to be sort of displaced, if you will. Anduril is leading the way. Similarly, these are massive, massive businesses. So the bull case for some of these component players could be, we could take away Raytheon's X business or Y business, naval business, or, aircraft business, what have you, right? So that could be the bull case. The way they disrupt it is through a massive, massive cultural shift. Their culture allows them to attract better talent that is more in tune with the most modern technology and therefore build modern machinery that the DoD will buy. So that's the bull case. We'll see over time.
Yeah.
In every market, there are those that will win and there'll be some losers. That's the definition of innovation. So I do want to come back to J2 and your focus. So give us some examples of some recent investments, some investments that have worked well for you. And then from there, what is it that you're looking for right now?
Yeah, so I would say that the counter to the bull case is the bear case, which is if I were to look at these defense contractors that people do pick on and are really upset, you can list a couple. You can't list a ton. So the size of the prize isn't massive because just like when you look at Anduril has realized very early on there's only so much you can do organically. You have to buy companies, resell those as capabilities, and you have to normalize your revenue stream so you don't look lumpy, which is the only way that you can IPO a business in this, right? Otherwise, these lumpy contracts
absolutely.
just get penalized.
The bear case. I mean, we're a B2B generalist. I mean, if you
Yeah.
have just one customer, it's lumpy revenue, right? I mean, that's why it's very, very hard for generalist investors to just walk into that space because I can't wrap my head around a single customer and lumpy revenue, right? How does that ever exit unless there's a whole plethora of new Andurils and Palantirs propping up, which could be possibly M&A exits for
Well,
these
yeah,
companies, right? But how many of
like,
those
yeah.
can happen, right? There's no...
Well, and ask yourself, Jana, what kind of
It's not
world
an
is that
IPO
too?
company. Exactly.
Well, and moreover, if you're making guns and weapons and things that hurt people, like We're living in, Kosovo 1995, right? I mean, this is awful. Like, why would you ever want to introduce economic incentives whereby we are going to fight in more wars, not less wars? That's the philosophical point that I have. The second part is, as much as people like to hate on these companies, they produce stuff when no one else is producing stuff. Someone has to make the tanks, even when there is no war, and that is actually pretty economically difficult to wrap your head around. And so that's why these companies trade as a multiple of EBITDA, not as a multiple of revenue. Right now, they're trading as a multiple of revenue. And so there's going to be a massive crash once you get people in this more of a peace dividend mindset that say, why am I paying too much for this company? There is no war.
Right.
And by the way,
Right.
we should all want there to not be war, just to be clear.
Right.
And so,
And we should
yeah.
also make the distinction between Palantir, which is more a GovTech than a defense tech, right, company, and then the Andurils of the world when they exit into the public markets and how they trade. We'll see. So I
We'll see.
think
We'll see.
we'll see. Yeah.
They're doing extremely well. I would say I like the people at Anduril. They are proving the model, but it would be wrong to think that because Anduril did it, everybody or
Everybody
really
else
kind of
can.
almost statistically anybody else can do it. But to
Right.
transition to the J2 part of this, Neil and John, is if you believe what I said about the government being a de-risker of technology, and you also believe that people are skating in one of two directions away from that. They're either defense only, so I got to go for this end of the barbell or it's not worth doing, or the DoD is terrible, I'm never going to touch it. Both of those are market opportunities for companies that are going to say, wait, I can use money from the federal government to de-risk short-term product market fit. And as a result, I need to spend less investor money, give up less equity to build something with a better technical moat by the time I get escape velocity on the commercial sector. So we talked about Aura, of another company called Illyria, which is just an absolutely fantastic company, free space optics, software-defined network, that was actually originally created at Lawrence Livermore National Labs, which is a DoD national lab in California. Google Project Loon now lives as its own company. We have a company here in Boston called Code Metal, so possibly one of the best investments I've ever done. We were pre-seed investors in Code Metal that sells a code transpilation tool to the likes of, everybody from L3Harris to major car OEMs. Is the exact same tool, massive government contracts, massive OEM contracts, absolutely crushing it. We have another company in Boston, Lumia Health, that's an ear-based wearable. If you go on their website, there's going to be some 20-something woman who's going to get like green juice at Whole Foods and talking about managing her day around the Lumia device. And if I were to say that F-35 pilots paid for the development of how that device works, so this 20-something-year-old woman can go get a green juice at Whole Foods, you'd either not believe me or be really excited and say, how the hell can I do that? And so those is just an example of some of the ones that we've been doing lately, but it spans everything from telecommunications and infrastructure, medical wearables, surgical tools. Every single one of these companies works with the Department of Defense, and as a result has given up way less equity in the process.
Yeah. Excellent, excellent. So it sounds like, J2 is hyper-focused on both ends of the barbell. So you're finding these companies that are going and getting that budget to build that product, find the product market fit. Then you're helping them commercialize beyond DoD. And then investing in companies that have a great commercial business, but you can help them with an unlock in the DoD. Power to you and a lot of success to you and your team. I know your colleagues, John and Christine. And so really excited to have sort of a new firm doing so well in the ecosystem, because that's what keeps our business alive, right? It's this new, fresh perspective, the energy that is good for the entire ecosystem. So I am so delighted to have had this chance to have this really informative, educational conversation with you. I've learned so much today. And thank you for doing this with me, imparting any advice to or any suggestions to founders who may be listening to you today on how they should be thinking, what areas they should be thinking about. Where is the opportunity for dual use as you look to the next 5-10 years?
Two things, Neil and Jana. I think just because the market is hot right now doesn't mean that you need to participate in it. You don't have to found a GovTech or defense tech company because everyone else is doing it. If you don't want to do it, don't do it. Being a founder is really, really tough. And the market will also let you down should it shift. You should only be doing something because you're passionate about it. The second part is there are far too few people building in telecom. How we talk and how we communicate is archaic. I think that's the next big area. So if you are building in that category, I'd love to talk to you and I'd love to figure out how the government can make that a very NPV positive relationship. But thank you so much for having me on your show, Nilanjana. It's wonderful to be here in Boston. I think Boston's a great place to build. It's a wonderful community. I really appreciate your generosity and thank you for your kind words.
Thank you
Awesome.
again, and delighted to have you today. And I hope to have you back here on the show for your next fund.
Yeah, please.
Okay. All right. Thanks a lot, Alex.
Awesome.